Welcome one and all to the Ferret Raccoon podcast, episode 223. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you the first podcast of August 2023. And much like the previous podcast, I haven't really been doing too much. It's kind of been raining, so I haven't really been out too much, but I have been traveling about, getting work done, getting things organized. I've actually managed to pretty much sort out my life and current things revolving around, my life for the most part. So it's been very satisfying to actually have that out the way and be in a position where I can actually watch and do more things, which is something that has been quite absent from my life and something I have actually missed. So although I'm not really going to talk about anything I've been, watching, playing, reading over the last 2 weeks, from this point on, I'm definitely going to have a lot more things to talk about. So yeah, be prepared on the next episode. But yeah, the one thing I did actually do though over the last 2 weeks was I actually traveled, me and Recess, good friend of the podcast, and he's featured on a couple as well, is we went all the way down to King's Cross, particularly where the canal by King's Cross is in London, and we went to go see Jungle's film, the band Jungle, for their Volcano album, their fourth studio album, as it was essentially playing on the screen on the canal in King's Cross, which is a really interesting experience because they have this fairly big screen, which is kind of bordered with like a blue and yellow, design across the canal, and where you would sit, it's kind of like it's kind of like a hill, but it has like grassy or fake grass seats that kind of lead up to it, and you can kind of watch it, and there's cafes behind you. It was a really nice experience to watch this film as the sunset kind of went. And I don't believe the film is actually out, nor the album, so I've heard it, and yeah, it's got some tunes and I really enjoyed it. I don't want to spoil too much about what happens in the film, as it does have a very simple concept. If you've ever seen a Jungle music video, which I highly recommend watching and listening to any of their songs, it is very dance choreograph oriented, and this film having a very loose wraparound story about it kind of being about characters or dancers on a television broadcasting theatre production. It is interesting, and I think they really do change each song and kind of have it fit the theming of the song and visually and all that. I don't want to spoil too much, and it is very simple, but it is very well done. Props to every single dancer, the technicians, lighting, cameramen, and directors. They did a fantastic job kind of filming this, I think, about 45-minute long music video film, which is awesome. And I just love the fact that we're in an age when an artist can actually make a pseudo film to promote their album, especially have it make sense within the context of the album, or just be something really cool for you to watch one day. So yeah, highly recommend looking up Jungle if you've never heard of them. But let's move on to our news stories and topics. We're kind of going to dabble into a little bit of everything today on this episode, as we have 4 trailers, and we are kind of going down a slightly nostalgic route for the most part, especially with our first trailer, which is very nostalgic to me, and that is going to be for Ratatan, which is the next game in the Patapon series. Now, when I saw this game and this trailer, I was honestly like, oh my gosh, like, be still my beating heart. Like, this honestly takes me back. Because Ratatan is, like I said, the spiritual sequel to the Patapon series by the original creators, as the series was on the PSP, PlayStation Portable. The game was a unique sort of combo of being like an RPG with like a music theme, as you would like command a small army of Patapons with rhythm direction. So you would order them to attack, defend, run away, and all that kind of stuff. And as you essentially take on bosses, it was a very fun and extremely underrated series. The best games I can kind of link it to would be the Pikmin series, as Pikmin 4 recently just came out. It's a bit like Pikmin, except I'd say it's a lot less relaxing and not as micromanage heavy to some extent. And I would say Patapon is more RPG, stats, power, combat heavy, but they're very similar in some sense, with Patapon being a more 2D side-scrolling rhythm micromanagement RPG sort of thing with a very cute aesthetic. It had a lot going for it for such a simple and small premise, which is why I liked it. And I remember playing the hell out of the original games because it was actually a good friend of the podcast, Obsidian, who actually got me into the series because he was playing it. He told me about it. I went out and bought the second game, loved it. We both hyped over the third game, which I believe there was at one point we didn't even know if that game was coming out. But speaking of the third game, it has been 12 years since the last game came out. And the core gameplay with Ratatan essentially remains unchanged, as if it ain't broke, don't fix it, just improve it if need be. And I mean, visually, the game looks amazing. Like, the backgrounds are bright, it's colorful compared to the original, and I love the cute Ratatan's designs. And, you know, of course, the animation is very smooth, especially when you compare it to the original game. I would highly recommend, you know, kind of comparing the two. Look at the trailer, you know, in the description and download link for this game, and, you know, look at Patapon's gameplay. Not to say that Patapon is aged in any kind of sense, but it almost is like night and day, because Patapon was almost like, you know, black and white with the backgrounds being one color. This game has very distinct and beautiful looking backgrounds for the most part, so I really like what they've done with it. It does feel like a natural evolution without it feeling, you know, too distant at the most part. This game is on Kickstarter at the moment, and at the time of recording, let me double check the website real quick. Yeah, at the time of recording, it has essentially made £595,270, excuse me, and it has 170 backers. Sorry, because the numbers are still going up, so I'm kind of getting caught off by them going up and it literally changing as of me just reading it. So yeah, its original asking goal was actually $100,000 in dollars, I think pounds in our currency, because the website is converting it into, you know, pounds for me. And it was essentially funded within an hour, which is awesome. I was so happy to see this project hit its goal and then some, mainly because it means that the fans are still out there and that they still care. It must be such a nice feeling for the team to know that the people do want another Patapon game. And it's a shame that we haven't got one in the last, like, 12 years. You would have thought that Sony, who, you know, the original games were just... I don't necessarily think it's a Sony platform anymore, but you would have thought that Sony, you know, wanting to keep its more prized characters would want to do something about that, but we all know what Sony's all about. They're not really interested in their past anymore. But it is really awesome. I am going to back this Kickstarter. I almost feel like I have to. Because I think they deserve it. I want the game. I just want another Patapon game. I just want fun games, and this is what this game looks like. Everything about it just looks great, and I do love how they've once again kind of evolved the series. Like, it's taking place in a new world. The characters look, you know, similar but different. There's like more distinct Ratatans. Like, there's one that has a guitar, there's one that has claws, one with a megaphone. They've also teased that there's going to be other more special Ratatan characters who I'm guessing they're going to play a different role in your strategy on how you're going to take out these enemies or these bosses. So you may want to take this character, that character. It's all very exciting. The only issue right now is, do I go with the art book tier or the vinyl tier? I do hope that they let you stack it, because I want to get one of these and I want to get both, because the music in the Patapon games has always been very charming, very silly, like nonsense-ish, a bit like the Splatoon soundtracks, or, you know, some other games in the past where it was just like nonsense lyrics. It was distinctly coming from a Japanese era, the singer having a high-pitched voice, but they weren't really ever saying anything. It was like, you know, a good example would be the Klonoa series, where the whole soundtrack is just one singer just making like doody-doody-doo noises and that kind of stuff. So yeah, really looking forward to this game. Hopefully you guys will go check out the game. If anything, support it if you want another Patapon game. And yeah, I had to promote this game because I want to see fun games made by smaller creators. That is what I am promoting right now. Next trailer we have, still going back to the past to some extent, we have Adventure Time, Fionna and Cake. This is the official teaser for a new Adventure Time spin-off series. Now, despite being into animation, as I've talked about on this podcast many times, I know very little about Adventure Time, and I have always been like detoured because of its overarching story that kind of just came out of nowhere and just took over the series. Now, I'm not saying that Adventure Time couldn't and shouldn't have introduced a story and, answered questions about the lore of the world of Ooh, but when you have a series that primarily focused on being about adventures and having fun and small little stories and reoccurring characters and that kind of stuff, and then you start to go into this whole war situation, it's a bit of a drastic direction, to be honest. I'm not sure how to feel about it, but granted, I probably need to go back and watch the series someday for the most part, although some elements do kind of freak me out. But yeah, no, this essentially is going to be based on the Gender Swap spin-off, where it follows Fionna and Cake, who are the female counterparts to Jake and Finn, which was a very clever and sweet idea, and I do like how they are going to do something with these characters, because they don't really get seen anywhere in the animation as far as I'm aware, other than in other mediums like comic books and stuff. So I'm actually excited for this series. Setting it in a normalish real world and making the fantasy world of Ooh, which it might be, the escapist reality, I think is a very clever twist, because it kind of means that we're always going to be interested and happy to go to this fantasy world following Fionna, who's obviously very bored of her mundane life and the way her world is. We're kind of going to make that fantasy element, these magical characters, a lot more special, as opposed to them being the standard that they were in Adventure Time. Not to say there was anything wrong with that, because the world of Ooh was a fantastic world to explore. We do kind of see some familiar characters, which is interesting. So I do wonder if their fates, towards the end of the series will be the same. Obviously, we see I think it is still the Ice King. I know it's meant to be the Ice Queen in her counterpart reality, but it looked like the King. Obviously, we see the robot Bimo. I can't remember his name. Marceline. I'm vaguely trying to remember the characters, so if I'm butchering them or misremembering them, you have every right to be angry. We do see those characters, so I do wonder how they're going to play into things. Are we going to, follow their same stories? I know the situation with the Ice King is very sad, but I do wonder what's going to happen, and I am excited for that element. The animation does look on par with the original series, which is great. It looks a little bit more smooth, a little bit crisper. I do like that. I do feel like this one is probably going to be a little bit more adult. Anyone could basically watch Adventure Time, and I feel like when the story of Adventure Time kind of, continued on and got going, it was a little bit more geared towards teenagers. I feel like this is probably going to be kind of going down the same route of being more for teenagers, adults, children who grew up with Adventure Time, now adults, will probably maybe relate to the whole, mundane life, boring job theme that this series is going for. So I'm actually really, really excited for this series, like I said. So fingers crossed for this one. It's just a shame it's on HBO Max, because it means it will very rarely get put, or it's unlikely that it's going to get put on distribution anywhere else, which is such a shame. But hey, the internet exists for a reason. Next trailer we're going to go to horror now, with two very interesting returns. The first is going to be The Exorcist Believer. Now, you know what? I'm actually fine with this as a concept, only because it's Blumhouse, so this film is cheaply made, and I'd rather have a bad sequel than a pointless remake any day. Although this film borders on being a remake, and I know a lot of people, industry and outside, have said that this is basically a remake of the original film, which kind of makes sense when you look at the trailer, which, is unfortunate, but I'll get to that in a minute. There are things I did like about this trailer. Obviously, it's kind of going down a very different route, with it essentially following two friends and, the demon just possessing them, all that, classic stuff. There's been so many Exorcist possession films that I do wonder if this film is even going to stand on its own as being original, or is it just going to be another one of the throwaway films that get released nowadays? I mean, we even had another film earlier this year, The Pope's Exorcist, which, already the market is saturated just this year alone. But I do like how it's leaning more into the mental idea or angle of the situation, which is a point that is brought up a lot more nowadays when discussing the whole idea of faith, Christianity, and demonic possession. Is it actual demons, or is it just someone suffering with mental health? I do like that small element interjected into the film, as well as the fact that the film does reference the fact that almost every religious and religious culture has their own form of an exorcist, and obviously their own form of a demon to some extent. The fact that two characters are possessed is an interesting concept, as the scene of them together is like awful. It's really creepy. I don't know, it just makes me feel uncomfortable seeing them just sitting there kind of tied to a chair and just lamenting in the fact that they're possessed and that no one can do anything about it. It's awful, and I do like, once again, how they've kind of gone down that element of the parent not being able to do anything about their child who's now possessed by an awful demon. I think that stuff is great. And that's just about it in terms of the things I think are good about the trailer. Although, the problem is, it does bring up questions like, is it the same demon sharing two bodies, or is it two demons who have come together to pretend to be one demon? How does this even work? Demons typically don't just possess multiple people in that sense. They can, command a group of people to do things, but inhabit a body like that, or two bodies in this case, that I'm not honestly getting for the most part. And it honestly does feel like whoever's making this film they're really trying to up the ante compared to the previous film and compared to its competitors. Like I've talked about the Pope's Exorcist and other films just doing the blank exorcism, or the all that kind of stuff, where they're kind of like, this time it's two girls possessed. You know what I mean? The editing as well in the trailer is honestly god awful for the most part. It really spoils way too much, and it tries to really do that stupid high pitch audio cue cut to an edit. You see something shocking, or it tries to jump scare you in the actual trailer, which is just such a pathetic trend nowadays in horror, which is extremely unfortunate. And I do think the trailer itself does fall apart towards the end, and it just becomes nostalgia bait with familiar scenes, familiar characters, and obviously they start properly playing Tubular Bells, which obviously is the most iconic part of the film, apart from some of the things that the demon says in the film. And I do find it funny how Pazuzu has possessed another girl who looks exactly like Reagan. I know it's a demon, but does it have a preference for only wanting to possess girls that look like that? I know it's them transparently going, hey, we got to remind people of the original Exorcist. The girl has to look like Reagan, but we have to add diversity as well. I get it. It's pathetic pandering to people who remember the original films or who are nostalgic to it. I'm not particularly nostalgic to the original films. I mean, personally, my favorite film is the third Exorcist film, but even still, it's just come off it, man. Part of me doesn't want this film to succeed only because of that element, but given how the film was probably made on a budget of 20 million, it's probably going to be profitable, but talk with your wallet, I guess. Also, the makeup isn't as great as the original. They've really tried to kind of recapture that awful aesthetic of how Reagan looked when she was possessed, and they haven't really done it for the most part. And besides, that kind of look, it's very dated for the most part. The sort of very, I'm not sure how you explain it, the sort of scarred face and very squished proportions on the face. Sorry for the awkward cut there. For some reason, my laptop just decided to stop recording, which is incredibly frustrating because now the podcast doesn't sound consistent anymore. But I literally have one more trailer to go, and that is going to be for Saw X, or Saw 10, however you want to read it or refer to it as. And yeah, finally, the series is back to basics. No stupid spin-offs, just another, hopefully, fun Saw film. That's all people ever wanted, all we ever asked for, and they've finally realized the error of their ways and stopped trying to reinvent a series that didn't need to be reinvented. All it needed to do was just take a break. That's all it was, and kind of restructure. But yeah, they brought back Tobin Bell because it was the right thing to do. Because that man was essentially carrying the series. Getting rid of him was probably one of the dumbest things they ever did. And yeah, this is a really interesting one. I was very surprised to see that it actually is just a Saw film, like I mentioned before. The film takes place in between Saw 1 and 2, which is a smart choice, as those films have the biggest gaps within the original seven series, within the original 7 films, as pretty much, I think, from about 3, they pretty much happen right after the next. There is very little wiggle room, I guess you could say, between them, and everything gets explained that happened from the previous films in the next film. So yeah, it's very tightly knit. So someone clearly knows what they're doing, and like this one does feel a lot more personal, as Jigsaw is out for revenge, essentially, against people who have wronged him or have like taken advantage of him, especially him being like a slightly older man, or kind of like abuse the medical system, which I think is a really cool angle, kind of adds like an interesting bit of commentary if that is where they are going for the most part. A lot of people do kind of exploit loopholes that do exist within healthcare and all that kind of stuff with elderly people, kind of expecting that they just won't know any better, or it's easy to take their money. If this is what has happened, which is what I'm guessing possibly is happening, or maybe just Jigsaw is just annoyed that they weren't able to cure him, I guess, because we do know what happens to him, health wise towards the end of the series. But yeah, I think it is an interesting choice. I mean, it's a simpler film with a few characters trapped in a room, much like the first 2 films. It was very much focused just on these people, and occasionally with the, let's say, the police, detectives, whatever, figuring things out, they would see other examples of Jigsaw's work and that kind of stuff. We'd get flashbacks, and it did get quite egregious later on in the series, where you were jumping so far into the future and back, and it wouldn't really explain too much, like, where and when this was taking place. This does seem like it's going to be very much, people in a room, flashbacks to what happened to these people before they got into the room, and then shenanigans of gory situations just happen for the most part. So yeah, I am really interested. I do also like the addition of the victims, I believe, being able to see Jigsaw this time. It seems like they're in a room and he's kind of like looking down on them, talking to them, which I think is very interesting and goes back to that whole personal angle where he's like, I'm going to get revenge on you and I'm going to see you suffer. It's very malicious, very sadistic, and I do kind of like that angle. It is different from the previous series of films where Jigsaw was kind of always just behind the scenes. It wasn't always implied that he would watch or take pleasure in these people dying, but maybe given what they've done to him, he maybe wants to watch some people suffer, I guess, if they deserve it, but we'll see what happens. I'm hype. Hopefully this is a fateful entry in the series and it doesn't get too silly for the most part. So yeah, that's pretty much going to be the podcast for the most part. Over the last few podcasts, the video of the episode has been a rap song. So we're going to kind of change paces for August, and we're going to promote a different artist of a different genre. Apologies once again. My laptop has decided to cut off my audio and just not work, literally at the very end of the podcast. I am incredibly sorry about the quality of this episode, and I will sort out the situation, but I have recorded way too much to have to record it all again. So as I was saying, the video of the episode is going to be for Tommy and Piri with the song Lovergirl. This is their newest song, and they are a very interesting duo, electronic and drum and bass, something I have been listening to a lot over the last couple of weeks. Really helped in a odd way when doing a lot of my work. So I wanted to give them a shout out because I don't think they're getting enough attention, and I think they really do deserve it. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that episode and give them a listen and hopefully like them. I want to thank you for listening to this very, very messy episode of the podcast, and thank you for listening all the way through. I really appreciate that. Subscribing always helps, but yeah, I'm pretty much going to end this podcast as fast as I can, just in case the audio decides to cut off again. Sorry once again, and yes, I guess I will end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.